My name is Steve Radovan. As you can see, a number of years ago, I was kind of a diver. About 2014, 15, I decided diving was getting a little bit too hard for me to do. So basically, I stopped putting all of that gear on, and I just started looking for shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. I knew that I'm drawing a blank now. I knew the sanctuary was coming. I knew NOAA was going to be starting to do a lot of work in the area between Port Washington and Manitowoc. So I wanted to try to find a lot of things before NOAA came on board. And I actually was fairly lucky and found a number of shipwrecks in that period from 2015 until the present day. What I'm going to be showing you today are 3 of them. Actually, I'm scheduled to only show 2 of them, but if I don't bore you enough, I will pop on a 3rd one that when Todd Gordon gave his presentation, the last presentation, I think it was brought up by Katie that maybe some of you might be interested in the Phoenix. And if you're not too bored, I will throw on a little program of the Phoenix also. But what I do is, most of these programs are PowerPoint programs. I do not do that. I make videos.
Built in 1866 in Dover Bay, Ohio, by J.A. Johnson. It spent most of its life with Lake Michigan Registry, and in 1884 it was bought by the Freiburg interest of Sheboygan. At the first bend in the Sheboygan River, the Freiburg Sheboygan Novelty Company was mainly used in the manufacture of bookcases. Sitting in front of the Sheboygan Novelty Company is the scow R.H. Becker, which was built in 1867 in Dover Bay, Ohio, by J.A. Johnson, the same builder that built the I.A. Johnson. The Freiburgs also had holdings on Washington Island at West Harbor, where they had a lumbering operation along with a sawmill and dry goods store. The lodge at West Harbor Resort was that store and workers' quarters. I suspect much of the cut lumber was sent to Sheboygan to be used at the factories there. I can't be sure, but the scow at the dock at West Harbor is probably the I.A. Johnson. The wreck report shown here tells of the loss of the I.A. Johnson on September 23rd, 1890. It was struck off Centerville by the schooner Lincoln Dowell. The X marks the spot where the collision occurred. The scow was a total loss. Now comes both the tedious and exciting part of the operation, searching. Many hours are spent going back and forth in the boat, just watching the electrical instruments to see, sooner or later, something come up on the machines. The transducer pole extends into the water while I hold the boat's RPMs at 1400, giving me a speed of 5 knots. Maintaining a north-south orientation, I use TrackBack on the GPS. This allows me to go back over my original course to look at anything of interest. If nothing is there, I can then go precisely back to the location I left off. The depth recorder is showing me any anomalies directly under the boat. The sonar I'm using is the Lorentz structure scan. Right now time searching on the 400-foot range. This sonar has a maximum range of 450 feet. For deeper searches, I use a Raymarine CP200 with a range of 1,200 feet each side. On the upper right, a shipwreck is coming into view on the screen. When I pin the target down, I want to see what it is, so I throw the ground cameras down and look at the bottom. After many hours of tireless searching, on June 10th, 2015, the I.A. Johnson has been found. Retrieving the cameras. It's time for the next phase of the operation. Let's send some divers down. The divers I had in mind was the state of Wisconsin's underwater archaeologist, Tamara Thompson, along with underwater videographer, John Jansen. John Jansen enters the water first. Tamara Thompson, getting ready. She will take measurements of the shipwreck and also do some still photography.
I do want to note that, as you can see, they're not using conventional scuba equipment. They're all using rebreathers now. That's the up-and-coming thing for deep diving.
Well, they did told us the way.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of interesting. I didn't know that. What was the story?
Well, after I'm trying to remember the story now. I think after the collision and that, they did end up towing this quite a ways. They were trying to bring it back to Sheboygan. And it actually, the incident happened about 3 or 4 miles north of where the ship ended up. They were doing something.
Yeah. So that anchor thing was way out in the sand. And the anchor is
Katie after a successful dive.
Yeah, thank you.
What other interesting parts of the wreck? You said Maria and things like that?
Inside the local hatch there, down into the side, broken away. And there's a lot of property that's inside inside the coastal area. So it's upright, so it's laying over. John said he thought there was nested moles that are up there. It's pretty interesting. I don't know a whole lot of information there was, but we did there's pictures for you. So the stern's pretty cool too. So it's got a really nice rudder post forward off aft of the ship. On the sides of broken away, it's just the light of the shipwreck, the rest of it. The centerboard stands straight up. I couldn't tell whether the centerboard was up or down when it was thing. It was down inside. There were no openings in there. Couldn't see anything. I couldn't find any winches, but some must have been very simple and scout along the overlay. They built boxes and sat on the deck and the chains of the centerboard going through them. And they pushed the centerboard up the rigging. So, because there's no, I mean, everything else is there.
Does this wreck look a lot different than the other Scout schooners that you've looked at?
Yeah, it looks a little different. All of them are different because, there was the mission plans. Everyone is learning those Scout schooners, so we took take plans to build something like this. So all of them are a little different. They're sort of handyman special, and so that's what makes them cool because they are so very different from each other. So, and then warship planking, so normally on schooners, you'll see a lot of people planking on the interior of the shipwreck, or the exterior of the shipwreck. But this one, all like going across the warship, is very close out.
Let's talk about the size of the waterway, what type of scow. I couldn't tell, but I don't know.
I took a look at that. I think it has king posts because I could not see it. It's two different really types of construction for scow, how they connected the side, bottom, and they're very bottom. And what can be done with what's called a chine log, so they can have hefty log between down the sides of the ship. And then the side below is stepped into it. Or they can be made with king posts. And I think this one was the king post construction. So I might take a little dig in some area and make sure that there isn't a chine log there. That has to be
I did see, that was on the, let's see, that was on the starboard side of picking up. I spent most of the dive in the land.
Yeah.
And that turned out.
Yeah, hopefully, so we're going to try to put the egg together for you, and it'll all be lined up with a overall picture of what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I figured that would be an important thing I could do. That's what I did most. And I got some shots, running up and down the side.
The other thing I did see, I did see chain plates on the side of the ship, and some wire rigging. I didn't see any vents. I saw the valves for the ship boom are sort of, they've been bent backwards. There's a hinge that they go off to the other side, and aft a little bit. But otherwise, I didn't see any of the valves, or any other kind of masterpieces.
Well, as I mentioned, when we were coming up to the site there, I saw a bit of wreckage that I hadn't seen before on the depth recorder, so maybe there's something further more to the west.
I thought we were possibly inside off, do street searches out from the ship. Every time I would make a loop around, I try to go all a little further, and I discover little bits and pieces.
There was a piece off the bow.
Yeah, did you see that? That's a new hog pipe in it, so, yeah, so the chain went through it. Then follow that chain out, that's the chain that goes way off.
I found the chain for a little while, and I went back.
Let me just turn this off. Get this one out of the way. This particular wreck, scow schooners like this that are all broken apart, these are the types of ships archaeologists like. They like them when they're all broken apart. That's the way they can measure all the different pieces on them. I'll be quite honest, after I saw the video that was shot on the I.A. Johnson, this one really didn't interest me anymore. I like a ship to look like a ship. Go ahead. It's in about 85 feet of water, and that's one of the reasons it's probably as broken up as it was. When, before it sank, the collision happened a few miles north, and they tried to tow this thing back into Sheboygan. They were towing its stern first. And then it finally started breaking apart on them, went to the bottom, and I also expect because of its shallow depth and only about 85 feet of water, there have been some winters where the ice is probably, during storms, has probably done a little damage on this also. Any other questions on this one? Go ahead, Jim.
Was that a very clear day for diving?
This is becoming normal. Since the zebra and quagga mussels, the lake has cleared up quite a bit. When I started doing this back in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, when we were diving on these shipwrecks, and I would, let's just take this I.A. Johnson. Normal visibility on a shipwreck like this would be about 15 feet. There was a lot of suspended particles in the water. The water was a little darker. Since the quagga and zebra mussels, the water, they are filter feeders and they have cleared the water up quite a bit, and that makes it a lot easier for videographers and that to start to show audiences what these ships actually look like. Before, when we were doing this back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, we could only either film or videotape small segments at a time, and sometimes when we did these programs, it was very hard to explain to others, especially if you don't know much about how the ship construction and that is, exactly what you're looking at. So I have to give the mussels on the bottom a lot of credit for now making it a lot easier for videographers like I am to show you exactly what the ships look like on the bottom. I don't know what that's going to mean for the future though, because they're finding the quagga mussels especially are layering up so much that some people are afraid that they're eventually going to break these ships down. And they are finding also with some of the metal ships that are on the bottom, when the quagga mussels and zebra mussels attach themselves, they shoot out a little bit of carbolic acid, and that eats into the metal. So nobody really, the scientists as of now don't really know what's going to happen to our shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. The thought process is that it's going to become a finite research. Sooner or later, these things are going to break down, and the weight of the mussels and that are just going to start collapsing a lot of different ones. Yes?
At any point, they were talking about the chain and the anchor in the lake. What was that conversation about? The anchor was obviously dragging when they were towing this. The anchor is, nobody has found the anchor yet. Tammy, when she did her dive on this one, did swim out the anchor chain a little while, but it was stretched out and she didn't follow it. Eventually, the location of the I.A. Johnson hasn't been let out by the state yet. I told the state archaeologists that I would let them be the ones that determine what exactly they wanted to do with this shipwreck. I am not going to give out the exact location. If the State Historical Society wants to do that, that's fine. And then it can become the playground for a lot of sport divers. But as of right now, I believe the state still wants to do more archaeological study on this wreck. And we'll see what happens in the future.
Also, we talked about, the main keel, looks like the sides kind of came down like this.
Yes, and that's kind of typical. These scow schooners, a lot of them were built, they had square bottoms, and as you saw, the centerboard was standing there yet, but they had square bottoms and slab sides. And I don't think the keelsons and everything, the ribs in that were as strong as on some of the other types of schooners, and a lot of these scows do just kind of fold out.
And the last question, ship's bell, is there a ship's bell on these?
It's what?
A bell on the ships? Classically, there used to be the ship's bell.
I so far, the state hasn't really studied this one yet. I'm sure the bell in that, you could see in the front there on the video that the windlass was still there. Normally the bell is real close to the windlass. It's normally right in front of the windlass, and sometimes there's a stanchion that comes off the windlass and the bells are attached to that. Until the state gets a grant, and that's usually what happens, the state needs grants to study all of these things. Until they get a grant and really start to study it, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things found. Now, one of the things the state also doesn't do, and that is fan the bottom and look for things that are under the bottom. So things like a bell, which is heavy, could be under the sand, and as such probably won't be found until the sand uncovers it. Yes?
I understand from a historical standpoint for the local students, is there something that you learn, that we learn to future, et cetera, that, is it just purely historical information?
If I get that, well, the state, I'm not sure I should be the one to answer that question. The state thinks they're always learn. They like to do their surveys, and they seem to think they learn an awful lot by measuring things, and which they will do. I personally think a photograph, once the shipwreck like this is photographed, you're going to learn just as much as a lot of the things. I don't really want to badmouth archaeologists, but I think they waste a lot of time. I'm sorry. No. The I.A. Johnson, as the video told you there, they had their cabinet shops at the bend of the river and that, but they also had their lumbering operation up on Washington Island in West Harbor. If any of you have been up to Washington Island, there's a lodge and everything at West Harbor yet. And it's basically, there's a number of rooms in that in there. They had a number of people working for the lumber company that stayed up at West Harbor. They had a store in that building. So a lot of these things, the goods that were being transferred between Sheboygan and Washington Island, the ships would come back carrying lumber from Washington Island to Sheboygan to use at the Novelty Works because they were making cabinets and that. But when they went back up to Washington Island, they would be carrying goods for the store up on Washington Island. And basically, the I.A. Johnson, when it sank here, only had a a good amount of flour on it that they were taking back up to the island. One other thing of interest was Herman Freiberg, that same year that they lost the I.A. Johnson, was involved in a sail. He was a recreational sailor, and he was on a sailboat that capsized off of Washington Island in the spring of that year, where 2 of his buddies drowned. He was saved, but that's a little tidbit of information about Herman Freiberg. Okay, any more questions on this one? Yes.
How many shipwrecks were found after you started looking for some more shipwrecks?
How many did I find, or? I don't know exactly. Shipwrecks are being found every year. There are a number of shipwreck hunters on the Great Lakes. The technology is getting a lot better. So there are more people that are buying up inexpensive sonars and that, putting them on their boats and looking. But there still is a core group that is usually finding maybe 1 or 2 a year. Since this one, I'm trying to remember how many I found. I think I found 4 of them. When I started looking in 2015, because I knew that the sanctuary was coming, I found 4 shipwrecks in the Sheboygan area. And the next one you're going to see is another one that I found the next one that I'm going to show you here is the most recent one I found off of Sheboygan. And it's also a little deeper. Yes?
I didn't want to interrupt you in the middle, but I could hardly hear when that lady was talking. And I couldn't hear her voice loud enough.
Well,
Can you make it a little louder volume?
I have been told that this is not the greatest, that video is not the greatest in the world, because I was interviewing them, Tammy and John Jansen, as I was running the boat back to Sheboygan, and they were sitting on the engine cowling of the boat. And I'm sorry about that, but...
It was still good, but I mean, I didn't know if the same thing was going to happen if the volume could be put a little louder.
No, because the engine noise would have just raised with the voices, so there was... That was a mistake on my part when I did this video, and it will never happen again. Okay, I'm going to run the next one, and then we'll see what happens there.
What time of the year did that ship sink?
1890.
I mean, what time of the year? Spring, winter,
Oh, September.
September.
Yes.
Can you talk about the diving equipment a little bit? They had like an extra air tank with it?
Yes, okay, the divers down there on that video, as you can see that's me up there. I had the tank on the back. That was conventional scuba, breathing air and that. Nowadays, the videographers and the state, a lot of the more technical divers are using rebreathers. And that way they can stay down a lot longer. What it's basically doing is the machine that they have is and you see they're back with the old double hose regulators, because what they're doing is they're exhaling the air that their exhalation is going back into the scrubber on the rebreather, and it's being reused. So that's what a lot of the gung-ho divers are using rebreathers now, because they can stay down a lot longer. Yeah, that's one of the main reasons.
How long has that technology been?
What's that?
How long has that technology been?
Oh, that technology has been along since, probably about the 1940s and that. Yeah, rebreathers have been, but when the military was using them back in the 40s and that, they were air rebreathers. and or oxygen rebreathers, and then you were limited to about 20 feet of air. If you breathe oxygen, pure oxygen, under about 20 feet, you're going to black out. So now what they're doing is they're using air rather than pure oxygen in that, and that you're allowed to go a lot deeper with. And when you're starting to do real deep diving, and now they're using both open circuit with the old scuba or rebreathers, they're replacing the air. They're taking a lot of the nitrogen that's, the air you're breathing is about 70–80% nitrogen now, and they're getting rid of a lot of that. They're taking a lot of that nitrogen away and replacing it with a different kind of gas. Helium is the usual gas, and that allows you to go much deeper without getting what was called nitrogen narcosis. Normally the yellow tank is pure oxygen, because a lot of the divers, when they come back up at about 20 feet, they'll switch off of their regular breathing mixture and go to pure oxygen. Okay, let's go to the next one. This one should be a little bit better as far as the video, the sound. This one, by the way, is on YouTube.
Stories of shipwrecks have always been fascinating to me. These are usually stories of human survival or demise under extreme duress. Most people cannot comprehend the things going through a person's mind under these circumstances. We can only guess. So when I find a new ship on the bottom, one of the things I like to do is to tell its story using the images of the ship as a guide. After finishing a section south of Sheboygan, I moved my sonar search area north. After laying down a new baseline on my GPS of 2 minutes of longitude, about 2 1/3 miles, and boxing it in with 1 minute of latitude, I began searching with my sonar in a north-south direction, making a swath 1,600 feet wide or 800 feet on each side of my boat. On my third pass, I had a strong target, about 600 feet to my left side. I knew this was a ship, and I would look at it another day with my cameras. On the 9th day of August, 2019, I went out to the site with my drop cameras and sent them down to record what was at the bottom of the lake.
If you notice, this is a different camera rig. This one's a lot deeper.
After retrieving the cameras and downloading the video on my home computer, the first thing I saw was the starboard bow and anchor of a sailing ship. After sending the cameras down a few more times, I determined that the ship on the bottom was the two-masted schooner Abaya. The damage to the ship and the lack of cargo in its hold helped me make this determination. This set in motion a search for all the information I could find on that particular ship. Some boats were built on speculation, as this 300-ton bark built by Charles Stevens, the builder of the Abaya. Albany, New York, on the Hudson River, was the eastern point of a canal opened in 1825 through the rolling farmlands of New York State, traveling westward for 360 miles, ending at Buffalo, New York, on Lake Erie. At the foot of Lake Erie, at the western point of the Erie Canal, the growing city of Buffalo, New York, was becoming a major shipping port for the nation's western expansion. In a small hamlet 20 miles west of Buffalo, at Irving, New York, on the banks of the Cattaraugus Creek, in 1847, shipbuilder Charles Stevens launched a 134-foot-long two-masted schooner. On its first trip in November, it carried 135 cords of wood to Buffalo and then would lay up there for the rapidly approaching winter. On June 12, 1848, the Buffalo, New York newspaper reported the schooner Abaya, Captain Avery, came into port carrying 3,700 bushels of corn, 854 barrels of flour, 3,000 pounds of hams, 1,324 bushels of wheat, and various other cargoes from the bustling city of Chicago at the head of Lake Michigan, which was rapidly becoming a major trading center, shipping out the commodities produced in the heartland of the growing country. For the next 2 years, it was carrying commodities, mainly grain cargoes between Chicago and Buffalo. A round trip between the two lake ports took a month in time, so not a lot of trips were taken each year. September of 1850 found the Abaya making a special trip to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Rolled English wrought iron rails came to Buffalo on the Erie Canal, were loaded on the schooner, as was a 20-ton freighted locomotive from Norris Locomotive Works of Philadelphia. On September 12, 1850, rails were laid, and the Abaya was unloaded, and the locomotive was placed on the tracks, and thus the Milwaukee and Mississippi Railroad Company was officially started. Another brig, the Patrick Henry, a few days later brought another locomotive and rails. The first 25 miles only went to Waukesha, but the rail line would soon extend to Prairie du Chien on the Mississippi River. Back the schooner Abaya went on its Buffalo to Chicago runs. In May of 1851, the Abaya left Chicago and went off Milwaukee. A storm came up and dismasted the schooner. She was brought into Milwaukee and repairs were made at a cost of $1,500. Nothing of importance Happened to the schooner until July of 1853, when carrying another locomotive and 500 tons of iron in her hold, she sprang a leak at the bottom of Lake Huron. She got back into the St. Clair River and was towed to Detroit for repairs. In 1854, the sawmills on the Oconto River on the west shore of Green Bay were turning out vast quantities of white pine. The region's first steam-powered sawmill was located here. The 1850 census lists Oconto as having 415 wilderness dwellers. They cut and loaded the lumber on what were called the Chicago boats, stacked up and waiting at the mouth of the river. One resident said sometimes as many as 40 boats were at anchor there. The roughly 350-mile route saw a constant stream of schooners from Oconto, loaded with lumber, heading to Chicago. The schooner Abaya was one of them. They were offloaded and then sent back, usually empty, for another load. The last days of August and the first few days of September 1854 were very eventful in the area of Sheboygan and Manitowoc. On August 30th, in a dense fog, the steamer Lady Elgin, with 300 passengers, struck a shoal southeast of Manitowoc, put some holes in her hull, and just made it to the pier in Manitowoc, where she sank in 9 feet of water. While the Lady Elgin was on the bottom in Manitowoc, a southeast gale came up between Sheboygan and Manitowoc and capsized the schooner Abaya. The 7 crew and 2 passengers got off in the schooner's small boat and were picked up by a passing schooner and brought into Sheboygan. In the following days, a small steamer and a steam tug searched for the capsized floating schooner. The steam tug Eclipse found her and started towing her to Sheboygan when another storm came up, and while being towed, the Abaya started coming apart and went to the bottom on about the 11th of September. For 165 years, the schooner Abaya rested on the bottom of Lake Michigan. When I located her while making a general scan of the lake bottom between Port Washington to the south and Manitowoc to the north, I knew the Abaya was somewhere in the vicinity of my search area, and I was hoping to find her. For the next few weeks, I would send my drop cameras down to shoot video of the schooner. By doing this, I soon got a good picture of what the schooner looked like on the lake bottom. I believe that when the schooner capsized, she laid over on her starboard side, exposing her port side. I believe the mizzen mast unstepped, and either while laying on her side on the surface of the lake, and possibly while being towed, the loose mast acted like a battering ram, taking off the deck of the schooner aft of the centerboard. The damage to the framing on her port stern indicates this also. While the schooner was being towed to Sheboygan, another storm came up, and the schooner started coming apart further, collapsing the port stern, reaching the hull, and sent her to the bottom of the lake. The camera floats, bobbing in the waves at the surface, gives a jumping motion to the collapsed hull. The base of the unstepped mainmast seen here also acted as a lever, damaging the foredeck. I gave the location of the schooner to Wisconsin State Historical Society, which sent divers down to measure the schooner on the bottom, coming up with 134 feet, thus confirming the identity of the ship. The Abaya was a workaday schooner, not unlike many others, but by bringing the first locomotive to Wisconsin, ties her in with Wisconsin's railroad history. And her final resting place off Sheboygan will put her on the National Registry, and her story will be retold, giving her a rebirth. Okay, we'll take this one off. Any questions? The depth is about 200 and a little less than 240 feet. This one is known to some divers. I tried to keep the location of this one secret also, but unfortunately something happened and the location got out to the divers, and there have been some technical divers on this wreck since. The state still does want to do some more research on this particular boat. Yes?
This was excellent. This was an excellent video.
Thank you.
I can tell you're getting better at doing what you
Well, I hope so. You know, that's what time does that.
At what point did they develop all this sonar stuff enough
Oh, well, the sonar,
for people like you to begin looking for ships?
well, actually, it's not being developed. Well, I should take that back. A lot of the sonar equipment in that was originally developed during the World Wars. But then also oil exploration came about, and a lot of the sonars were used for the mapping the ocean bottoms and also fishing. A lot of the sonars nowadays are being used by the sport fishermen and commercial fishermen.
What year did that begin to become more common?
I want to say we started using the sonars back in the about the mid-1970s. They really started taking off probably around 1980 or so, but those were pretty crude sonars unless you wanted to spend a lot of money. There was a fella, George, now I'm trying to remember the name. Edgerton was his name. He kind of developed one of the early side scan sonars, and it was being used by some of the lake mappers and that over on the East Coast. I think he was a professor at MIT, and he was the EG&G sonar, and that was probably one of the first prototype sonars in that were being that us wreck hunters could start purchasing in that. They were actually fairly expensive at the time. That particular sonar, I believe, was going for about $35,000. And back in the late 1970s, that was a lot of money. There was a few people that had them that could afford them. But then in about the 1990s or so,
fishing technology, they were starting to develop a lot of these smaller sonars like the ones that you saw on my boat. They were starting to develop those for the sport fishermen, especially in the ocean. They kind of like to sweep around and look for the tuna and that are in mid-water. So they became available, and we could see the potential for finding shipwrecks with those also. Some of the earlier ones were limited in range. I think Lowrance and Garmin and that, there was one other company. They were some of the first ones coming out. They were limited in range to about 450 feet. Then some of the longer range ones a few years later came out, and now we could really start looking at the lake bottoms with this, because with 450-foot sonars, it's a huge lake out there. And when you're dragging a sonar behind the boat, even like mine are hull mounted, you could only go about 5 miles an hour. So it took an awful lot of time when you're looking at 450 feet each side. And usually if they're rated for 450 feet, the effective range is about 350 feet on these sonars. I was able, after I found the IA Johnson with the 450-foot one, I purchased a Raymarine sonar that had an effective range of 1,200 feet on each side. So the technology was getting better, and as the technology got better, we just kind of made our little steps up. Yeah. Well, there's probably about, on the Great Lakes, I would say there's about 5 or 6 people that are doing this in a systematic fashion in that. There aren't a lot, but that's a lot more than when we first started. There was only 1 or 2. Yes?
What is the overall protocol or jurisdictional considerations? Is it finders keepers?
No. The laws changed in 1986. The professional archaeologists were coming aboard. The schools were turning out archaeologists, and they needed jobs, so they started talking to our congressmen and senators and congressmen, and they said, we need some laws in that to protect these wrecks. The technology was getting better. There were more people getting involved in this, and they saw that it was time to start protecting some of these wrecks because there are only so many of them out there, and they were becoming more interesting to the general public. So about 1986, a lot of it started, let me back up a little bit, a lot of it started down in Florida when they started going after the treasure ships. And they were starting to find things with a lot of gold and very high monetary value. That kind of was one of the inducements for underwater archaeology. And it kind of just spread from there, and they started seeing, hey, there's some pretty neat things on the bottom of the Great Lakes. Maybe we should study that too. And that's kind of where it took off. In 1986, one of the very first laws in the Great Lakes region was the state of Michigan. Actually, they passed their laws, I think it was about 1984 or so, and the state of Wisconsin followed shortly after. And I'm going to say I think it was a good thing that these laws were passed. And I'm actually proud to say that the state of Wisconsin's law in 1986, I was on the advisory committee to pass that law. The protocol is anything on the bottomlands of the respective state belong to the state. If you want to if something is important enough to be brought up, it has to go before the State Historical Society's committee on that, and they will decide whether they're going to issue a permit or not to bring something up. Now, a lot of the things, and we were talking about a capstan that came up off of the Seal of Chamberlain pre-1986 that was sitting up on Erie Avenue at Roy's Dive Center. That predated the law, so there was nothing that said that anything that predated the law can't sit in somebody's backyard and that. A number of the things that were brought up before the law that divers or relatives of divers, as the divers are dying off, some of the kids just don't want all of this junk laying around. The state, or the Manitowoc Maritime Museum, has a facility that they're developing now, a storage facility, and they're willing to take a lot of this stuff that was people don't want anymore.
Other than the mussels, what type of marine life, if any, is at the depths where you find them?
Well, you see a lot of bottom-dwelling things like the gobies and that. Occasionally I'm using drop cameras now. My diving days are over. Age has just finally caught up to me. So I'm using drop cameras, and I have to say that doesn't scare the fish like the bubbles used to scare the sport fish. So I have a couple of videos, one in particular where of a ship that's laying in about 300 feet of water. If you look real closely, you can see a fish swimming between the masts and that. On a lot of these deeper wrecks, you'll sometimes find schools of alewives are very common. At certain times of year, the alewives are down in the deep water near the bottom, and they're actually kind of neat. If you swim in a school of alewives, there's a lot of flashes all around you and that, and it's just kind of neat. But there are also a lot of bottom-dwelling fish, and one of the most popular is the lawyer fish, the burbot. Those you normally find, they just kind of like to hang out there. They don't move very fast for you. They're fairly slow swimmers, and a lot of the sport for some of the divers was seeing if you could catch the burbot by the tail. And then they'd try to get away from you, but.
Steve, you mentioned that relative to that whole thing of jurisdiction and finding that kind, you mentioned you don't disclose something particularly right away. Why is that? Why is there a delay in notifying, hey, here's the coordinates, here's the GPS coordinates, it's 200 feet down or whatever?
You're talking about mine in particular?
You're fine.
Because, and I understand divers, and I understand that it's very hard, and I was the same way before the laws were changed. I understand it's very hard to leave something there, especially, boy, this is pretty neat. I want this. And that's still true nowadays. That hasn't changed. So my particular, and I know a number of other shipwreck hunters also, we're into the videography and the picture taking and all of that, and leaving the ships themselves to the archaeologists, which are going to leave everything there in place. The ones that, and I'm thinking of one off of Sheboygan, off of actually Centerville, called the Galley Nipper. after the law was passed and it was well known, all of a sudden the wheel of that, and by the way, Galliniper is one of the earliest ships that was ever lost on Lake Michigan. It dates back to 1832 when it was built, and it sank in the 1850s. But anyway, after we found it and the location became known, all of a sudden, and we knew the historical significance of this shipwreck, the wheel was gone. And then the figurehead on it was gone. So, as well-meaning as some divers say they are, there's a little bit of that in people that just want to take things. So hence, when I find something, I give it to the state. I do not give the location of it out, and I tell the state archaeologist or the State Historical Society, if you want the location to go out to the divers, do your thing on it, and then it's up to you if you want to give the location out. Yes?
What is your strategy in finding the wrecks? Do you just go?
Well, yes, no, it's not aimlessly, no. No, it isn't aimlessly. I quadrant off the lake. In other words, I do things in 2-mile sections. I have slips of paper that have been laid out on the charts and I do usually a minute of latitude and a minute of longitude, which comes out to about 2 miles. And as I'm going with my sonar, usually in a north-south direction, I'm laying down the track on the GPS and trying to stay, and I'm also laying this out on a piece of paper, and if anything comes up in there, like any anomalies on the bottom, I make notations on the paper of exactly where that is. And if you're interested in knowing exactly how I do it, the Manitowoc Maritime Museum has an exhibit in their shipwreck hall that shows you my chart layout and everything.
Do you know, some of the shipwrecks before you go?
Yeah, I have a pretty good idea that, like the Abaya, I knew the Abaya was out here somewhere. And I knew kind of what part of the lake it was. But as I said earlier, when the sanctuary was being developed, I knew that they were going to be doing surveys of it. So I basically wanted to start surveying the whole area before they came on board. And that's what I started doing back in about 2014 or so. And it's been systematic. Before that, we were a little more haphazard. We were using, we didn't have all the GPS. We didn't have GPS in that. We were using Loran. And we were kind of just wandering around. We also talked to the commercial fishermen. The commercial fishermen have found an awful lot of shipwrecks out there. And they if you get in tight with them, they will usually tell you where their snags are or the general location of where their snags are. And then we would go out with our sonars and kind of look in these areas, and we found a lot of shipwrecks that way.
As a follow-up to that, natural currents and things of that sort, is there a tendency that ships are in a particular chain?
No, I think it's usually, you have to look where the popular routes of where travel was. Actually, when you look at the curves, like I'm thinking, when you're saying this, I'm thinking in particular the curve from Sheboygan to Manitowoc. Manitowoc starts curving way out to Raleigh Point out there. Well, there wasn't a lot of stuff inside of that curve because most of the ships were coming between Sheboygan and the Chicago and the upper lakes. They were staying further out into the lake. They knew Raleigh Point was there, So they were staying fairly well offshore because they didn't want to run aground at the point. So you knew that in this basin, closer to Manitowoc, there really isn't going to be much. And also, this area, that particular area was prime alewife territory. The trawlers from Two River spent a lot of time in that area, and they did find one or two things, but for the most part, it's a pretty barren bottom out there. Yes?
So, once you find the ship, then you have the history, or do you look first of all at a history of ships that were lost?
Well, both. We do it both ways. I've been studying where shipwrecks have been for, 40, 50 years. Also, some of them that we find take you by surprise, that you don't know they were there, and you take a look at them and now, okay, what is this? Then you start asking around to some of the other people. If you don't know, you start asking people like Tammy Thompson at the State Historical Society, which is studying this all, or other maritime historians. Okay, what could this be? What could that be? And you start becoming fairly knowledgeable after the fact. Because one of the things, and there's another one, I don't have the program done yet, but I'm working on another program that was one that I found in this area that's going to be very interesting, but I didn't know anything about it, and nobody actually knew it was there. It basically was one of those that disappeared on the lake. But after looking at the video in that and talking to the State Historical Society, we determined what it was and started researching its history. And it's going to be a fascinating story once it's done, I guarantee you, because I told you in the I.A. Johnson thing that the Lady Elgin was on the bottom up in Manitowoc. It punched some holes off of the reef up there, sank in 8 feet of water. Well, the captain of the one that I'm telling you about now was when the Lady Elgin was lost off of Winnetka, Illinois, and over 300 people died. He was the captain of the ship that sunk the Lady Elgin. I've got that ship off of Sheboygan. So that's coming up at a future time. Yes?
Is there a ship out there that's gone down that it's hit and nobody has found it yet? I mean, is there
There are a few of those out there yet.
that, if you ever find this is the big one?
Yes, and the one that comes to mind with that criteria would be the Griffin. The very first shipwreck lost on the Great Lakes. That's kind of the holy grail for shipwreck finders, but I don't think it's ever going to be found because I think it was broken up in the middle of the lake. And that's in the 1640s. So, but yes, there are a few more out there that have just disappeared. And eventually they'll be found. Right now, NOAA and the state of Wisconsin and NOAA, they're in the process of mapping the entire lake again. Yes? Whenever the weather permits. Fortunately, I live in Sheboygan. I can take a look out my window and see what the trees are doing. If the trees aren't bent over too long, maybe it would be a nice day to go out on the lake. That's kind of the criteria. Yes?
How deep could you dive?
Well, how deep was it safe to dive, or how deep did we dive? Every diver will tell you the maximum depth they've been in, because they know. My maximum depth was 235 feet off of Isle Royal. And that was diving air. That wasn't diving trimix. And as anybody that knows diving air at that depth is a no-no. but here I am.
Did you ever suffer any consequences from diving?
It's what?
Did you ever suffer any consequences from diving?
Yeah, I have a twinge in my left arm every once in a while, and I think that came from, actually I think it came from that time that I did that 235-foot dive. Because I do remember when I came up from that, I had a little pain in the shoulder, and it's been there ever since. Yes? What is my background? How did I get into this? My brother started diving before I did, and I said to him, if you can do it, I can do it. And he stopped doing it shortly after I started doing it, but I then got tied in with, after I started diving, we were all in the Sheboygan areas, the people that were diving, kind of interested in, well, what are we going to do? We're diving the inland lakes, we're finding bottles in Crystal Lake, Elkhart Lake, etc. There's got to be something else to do. And then the shipwreck diving came in. And fortunately, early on, back in the mid-1970s, I tied in with a fellow that was up here from Waukegan, Illinois, John Steele, who was kind of the premier shipwreck hunter on the Great Lakes at the time. And I was standing, looking at his boat, kind of just, he was there, he said, would you like to go along? And I said, yeah. And then I started hanging around with him. And that's what started everything. And I've been doing it ever since, and that was in 1974, I believe. Yes?
We were all babies in our mother's womb. We were breathing liquid. There's a movie out a number of years ago
Yes.
called The Abyss.
Yes.
They went to extreme depths because they had liquid in their lungs,
Mm-hmm.
and they extracted the oxygen that way. Is there anything like that?
Not yet.
Not that.
No, and I that's a good movie. I've got it at home. But no, as far as I know, that hasn't become the norm yet. So, yes.
What are the dimensions of the current marine sanctuary? Is it just around Manitowoc?
The current marine sanctuary here extends from right around Mequon Road off of Milwaukee, and it runs just to the south of Kewanee. And it runs out 5 miles into the lake. Actually, it's a little more than that. I think it's about 8 miles into the lake.
Do they have anything around Washington Island?
No. No, but believe it, it really doesn't matter because as far as shipwreck protection, the laws of the states, the various states now, and the state of Wisconsin should protect these ships. You know, if it's around Washington Island and that, it's still on the state bottom land protection.
I know as a kid, my father used to dive with investigative amphibians out of the public library. They had people from Kenosha, Michigan, and they would always go around as a guest doorway by Washington Island.
Mm-hmm.
There were a number of wrecks, and back in the 60s, it was scavenging, and all the bars in down in Kenosha had dead eyes.
Yes. Right. No, it was that was a big thing back in the 60s when diving started in the Great Lakes. Sport diving for these things started right around 1967 and 68. I think that's pretty much when all of this started. And yes, Door County was a very popular place to go because everything was in shallow water up there. It was usually all broken up. It's a good place to go up and do some scavenging. Everybody liked being up in Door County, up to Washington Island. There was a number of things, and I included spent a lot of time in Washington Harbor and that on Door County, on Washington Island. because there was a shipwreck right on the east side of the harbor in there, the Louisiana and that. Oh, let's go up scrounging on the Louisiana, and just across from that were the old Goodrich docks. And yeah, it's just fun being on the island. But we have to, if we're diving, we've got to maybe see if we can find a rusty nail or something on the bottom. Yes?
Speaking of Door County, there's I thought it was heavy currents between the north tip of Door County, Northport, and Washington Island, and that between them, they call it Death's Door.
Right.
Is there a lot of ships, and is that a heavy current area? Struggling between?
It's not terrible. There's other places, actually right off of Sheboygan, some of your strongest currents are. We have right off the power plant an area that we call the humps. And a lot of that is where converging currents on Lake Michigan, they kind of converge and then they head out. And there's huge sand mounds. If you go off the power plant out to about 240, 50 feet of water, there's huge sand mounds down there. And a lot of those were created by the various currents. And I've noticed a couple of times when there's a shipwreck right in among those humps, the Hetty Taylor. I've noticed a couple of times being on there, and I did a lot of diving alone too. And I would always take a look over the back of my boat. If the propeller was spinning, I didn't dive after I was anchored, because you knew that the current was faster than 5 knots. And you did not want to become separated from the boats. So,
But are there a lot of ships or anything down between Washington Island and Door County?
there's a few more out there probably, but most of the things in the Washington Island area happen in the shallows up near Pilot Island and things like that, up to the eastern part. Back in Death's Door so much, I can't think of anything right in Death's Door itself. But there are a few up closer to the island.
We want to see your last video.
Okay, the Phoenix. You want the Phoenix, all right, we'll pop that one in. Let's see if I can get all of this stuff working again. Okay, if we could have the lights. I'm going to go this side. I want to get my water.
I was doing the sonar search north of Sheboygan on Tuesday, September 16, 2014, searching for the shipwreck I.A. Johnson, when I picked up a target on my sonar screen about 200 feet from the boat. I played around with it with my depth recorder and determined it to be about 45 feet long and sitting 3 feet off the bottom of the lake bed. I gave it a waypoint number on my GPS and noted in my written log to look at it further with my drop camera. It would be on Monday, May 4th, 2015, before I set my camera down to look at the waypoint. After reviewing the camera's image on my home computer, I determined this to be a sunken log and didn't think anything more of it as a potential shipwreck site. I kept the video I shot of it because I was thrilled that I was able to find a target such as that in the open lake. I made a short video of it to be used in a display at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum in Manitowoc on my sonar searching techniques, and used this log video as part of the display. The video shot that day in May was at a downward angle, and about 15 feet from it, the water also being a little bit hazy. In the spring of 2015, I installed a new sonar on my search boat Discovery that was capable of much greater range than the Loran structure scan and resumed my search for the I.A. Johnson. On June 6, 2015, I had another target on my sonar and recorded the waypoint. Played around with it with the recording depth sounder, but could find nothing. 4 days later, I looked again with the recording depth sounder, and this time I saw an 8-foot obstruction on the sounder's screen. I now knew I had something to look at with the cameras. It would be Friday, August 21st, before I sent my cameras down to the site and confirmed I had found the schooner I.A. Johnson shipwreck. Years would go by without any more thought of my sunken log find in 2014. In late May of 2022, I received an email from Kevin Cullen from the Wisconsin Maritime Museum telling me of a request received by him from a reporter from Winterswijk, a town in the Netherlands. Jaski Meredith worked for a media company called Omroep Gelderland, and they are interested in making a podcast of the steamship Phoenix disaster, which happened on Lake Michigan off Sheboygan on November 21st, 1847. The ship, with numerous immigrants from Holland, caught fire and burned that evening, with many of the passengers perishing from either the flames or the frigid lake waters, within sight of their next stop, the growing small town of Sheboygan, Wisconsin. I agreed to help with the project, which started a series of email conversations with Yoski. In these conversations, one of the things that kept coming up over and over again was, could they see any remains of the ship Phoenix? On that fateful night, the remains of the smoldering ship was towed into Sheboygan by the steamer Delaware and placed on the north side of Farnsworth Pier, where it rested in 8 feet of water. Over the course of that winter, the local residents picked through the wreckage looking for valuables, and in addition, in late December of 1847, a wrecking crew came from Chicago at the behest of the two Buffalo, New York insurance companies with the purpose of salvaging the usable machinery from the outdated steamer. After their salvage, the boiler was left on the shore and the hull was left to go to pieces where she lay. The hull broke apart and the pieces scattered on the shoreline at the foot of the pier. I had knowledge of this story, and as such, the steamer Phoenix was not considered to be a ship for a shipwreck diver to look for. As divers, we have thought the possibilities were there of finding valuables on the lake bottom where the tragedy occurred. The only deterrent was that the exact location to look would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. We had an approximate location to where the fire took place, but there was nothing to pinpoint the exact location. Endless swimming at the bottom of the lake in 100 feet of water was useless in our minds. Yoski's emails and my agreement to help led me to start researching and reading about the tragedy again. In the reading of the account of the smokestack going over the side in the fire, got me to thinking again of the log I had found at the lake bottom in 2015. There now was a possibility in my mind that this could be more than just a log. I made the determination to get another look at it with my drop cameras at hopefully a closer distance. Before this happened, the crew from Holland arrived and we all decided a diver would take a look at it when the reporting crew was at the site. On Tuesday, July 26th, on a calm sunny day, I took the podcast crew from Holland out on Lake Michigan on my boat Discovery to an area north of Sheboygan where I thought the disaster occurred. The crew from Holland shot video of the shoreline abreast of where we were. Then I took them to the site where I found the supposed log 7 years ago. I picked it up on the sonar, which they got on video, and I got a good recording on my depth sounder, noting that it came up off the lake bottom, 3 1/2 feet. Now in my mind, I was thinking a log would not be that large in diameter, and there is a possibility that it could be something else. Throughout our planning, Kevin Cullen made it known that he would like to dive at the disaster site. But he came down ill, so I called Tamara Thompson, from the state of Wisconsin's Underwater Archaeology Department to see if she would make a dive to take a closer look. She agreed, and 3 days later, on Friday the 29th, her and Caitlin Zant arrived in Sheboygan, and we again went out to the sunken log site, where I dropped the buoy from Discovery with the film crew from Holland on my boat, and Caitlin and Tammy on the state's Boston Whaler Dawn Treader. Tammy suited up and, taking her camera, descended to the lake bottom. She was spending a long time on the lake bottom, and I mentioned to the crew from Holland that was a very good sign. They were shooting video all along, hoping it was more than just a log. When Tammy came back to the surface, she confirmed there was a smokestack laying on the bottom of the lake with its guy wire in the sand off to the side. The exact site of the Phoenix tragedy had not been found, with its smokestack laying on the lake bottom below us. The crew from Holland was ecstatic with this discovery, and needless to say, I was a little pleased also. There are now physical remains to be used in the telling of its story.
Okay. If we could have the lights. Let me just shut this all off. Ah, okay. Let me just get this done first. Turn this all off. The significance of the tree branch. I'm trying to remember the story there. I believe, and I'm trying to remember if it was a specific type of branch, but it's what?
Is it a Dutch thing? They wanted a tree branch on it, or
Well, the tree branch actually just came there, but there's a significance if there's a tree branch at a dead a site like this here, and I'm trying to remember. I was told it, and I'm drawing a blank on it. But it does mean something, and I think the people from Holland are the ones that told me that. I can't think of it. I'll email Yaski and I'll ask her again. Yes, Jeff.
I know you touched on it before, but what are you currently working on?
I'm currently working on a ship called the Mojave. It's going to be a pretty interesting one. It's a brigantine that's in about 300 feet of water off of Sheboygan, completely intact on the bottom. The masts are still standing on that one. And anyway, the captain that died on the Mojave, this is a ship that just vanished off the lake. It was coming out of Chicago, and it simply vanished. Nobody knew where it was. This was 1864. And the captain, Darius Nelson Malott, was the captain of the schooner Augusta that struck the Lady Elgin and sent the Lady Elgin to the bottom of the lake off of Winnetka, Illinois, with over 300 souls lost. And I'm kind of working on that video next. And I'm also working on the story, the Darius Nelson Malott story, because he has a very colorful history. After the Lady Elgin disaster, he was very much maligned, and a lot of stories were written about him, some of them true and some of them not true, and I'm trying to determine which ones are true and which ones aren't. Yes?
Going back to the Phoenix here, one stack, it looked like it had two stacks on it.
No, it only had one.
You only found one?
Yes.
Ship had only one.
I'm trying to remember. Did it have two? It only. I thought it only had one stack.
That was a mask.
I'd have to look at the picture again, quite frankly. But yeah, I believe you're right. I think one was a mast. But I thought there was only one stack, because I'm remembering some of the stories, and they were talking about when the stack fell off the boat, it fell on a number of people that were struggling in the water.
So is that why the stack might be separate from where the bulk of the ship?
The bulk of the ship, it was towed into Sheboygan Harbor. As I showed you the picture of the base of the pier there, the old Farnsworth Pier, which is in the 1865 surveys, and that was no longer there. But on the video, you could see where the cribbing of it was, and it ran off to the side. Well, if you also notice the street it was right by Center Avenue, and the street right behind it was 4th Street. That was the very first street. You have to remember where the Sheboygan Yacht Club, the boat ramp, and all that is, that's all fill. That has all been filled in over the years. And theoretically, when the original shoreline was there, the base of the pier was right between where 3rd and 4th Street are right now on Center Avenue. And my guess is if there were physical remains of the Phoenix, they would be either under that apartment building there or in the middle of the street. And I don't think anybody's going to tear the street up to find the remains of the Phoenix. So as far as I know, and the boiler was on the beach for a number of years, and it eventually just disappeared. So as far as I know, the smokestack is the only physical remains of the Phoenix that are ever going to be seen. But that also tells us exactly where the disaster happened. And in fact, I just asked Tammy Thompson a couple of weeks ago when one of the ships, the Mojave, in fact, made the National Register. We had a meeting up in Madison and I asked her the question of what the state was going to do with the smokestack of the Phoenix, how they were going to designate it. and she doesn't know yet. They're either going to eventually designate it as a National Register site, or they may designate that area around the smokestack as a grave site. That's all up in limbo yet. Any other questions?
I just have a comment. I like the way you end your video with that quiet reverence, just going up the smokestack.
Well, thank you. And I think it deserves reverence.
I think so too. And it's very nice.
Thanks.